The speech will be around 20 minutes, and then there's a possibility to ask some questions.
Hi, thanks very much for coming to hear me talk about the problem with trolleys. My name is Maya. I'm a DPhil candidate at the university, Leuphana University, where I've just started a PhD on this topic. I'm also the Director of Applied Research at Tactical Tech here in Berlin. But when I speak today, I'm not speaking as an engineer or a technologist. I'm speaking as a cultural studies scholar from a science and technology perspective. So it's interesting to be part of this stage on mobility, considering some of the talks that have already happened here today. So I'm going to talk about the problem with trolleys. But before trolleys, I want to start somewhere else. I want to start with a dog in Wales. A couple of months ago, I caught a funny story on Twitter, and it was about how a dog had somehow found its way onto a highway, a motorway, in the north of Wales, and it was running around, and it was very distressed by the high-speed traffic, and the truckers, the motorists, were also very distressed by this dog on the highway. And, and the police got involved, and they said, kill the dog if you have to. If you have to run over the dog, do it because it's putting motorists at risk. And you have like trucks with 16 wheels and things, so I think the dog got run over. But the next day, Sky News picked up this story, and there was all of this social media outrage about killing the dog. So, okay, so you can actually see it quite well on this. So you can see the kinds of comments. People were very, very upset that a dog was killed. And they didn't know whose pet it was, but then the fact that it belonged to somebody, the feelings of the dog, the responsibility of the police, all of these things sort of came into the picture. And I was reading the story, and it was sort of exactly around some of the problems we have to confront when we think about what does it mean to engage with the trolley problem. So what is the trolley problem? I'm going to talk about the trolley problem as a legal scholar called Judith Thompson has spoken about it. Many people have written about the trolley problem. It's a long description, but I've put it up here, and I'm going to read it. And I quote from a 1985 article, actually, about it. Some years ago, Philippa Foot drew attention to an extraordinarily interesting problem. Suppose you are the driver of a trolley. The trolley rounds a bend, and there come into view ahead 5 track workmen who have been repairing the track. The track goes through a bit of a valley, and at that point, the sides are steep, so you must stop the trolley if you are to avoid running the 5 men down. You step on the brakes, but alas, they don't work. Now you see suddenly a spur of track leading off to the right. You can turn the trolley onto it, and thus save the 5 men on the track straight ahead. Unfortunately, Mrs. Foot has arranged that there is 1 track workman on that spur of track. He can no more get off the track in time than the 5 can. So you will kill him if you have to turn the trolley onto him. Is it morally permissible for you to turn the trolley? And just so that I don't have to spend all of this time talking, I also have a little video by a scholar called Patrick Lynn, who's done a lot of work on this. So it's just a little clip from a video which sort of applies this trolley problem to the context of driverless cars, because the trolley problem is what's being used to train machine learning software in driverless cars. I hope this works and the sound.
And you find yourself boxed in on all sides by other cars. Suddenly, a large, heavy object falls off the truck in front of you. Your car can't stop in time to avoid the collision, so it needs to make a decision. Go straight and hit the object, swerve left into an SUV, or swerve right into a motorcycle. Should it prioritize your safety by hitting the motorcycle, minimize danger to others by not swerving, even if it means hitting the large object and sacrificing your life? Or take the middle ground by hitting the SUV, which has a high passenger safety rating. So what should the self-driving car do? But now there's a motorcyclist wearing a helmet to your left and another one without a helmet to your right. Which one should your robot car crash into? If you say the biker with the helmet because she's more likely to survive, then aren't you penalizing the responsible motorist? If instead you say the biker without the helmet because he's acting irresponsibly, then you've gone way beyond the initial design principle about minimizing harm, and the robot car.
Okay, so there's a much longer video on YouTube which you can take a look at, and that kind of tells you about all of the different scenarios that a driverless car may have to face. Judith Thomson goes on to, in this very long and interesting paper, work through the trolley problem in different ways. What the trolley problem basically asks you to do is to actually engage with something quite complicated, which is it okay to sacrifice one person or five? A version of it, bystander at the switch, changes the position. You are not the trolley driver, but you're just a bystander. How should you make a decision? Are you responsible if you're just standing there and you have the opportunity to change the course of things? What is your responsibility? And transplant takes it into a different realm where you have a doctor who has the opportunity to save the lives of 5 people versus one young, healthy person. These are all kind of like really impossible thought experiments that Judith Thomson and other philosophers have set up. But they bring in a very interesting sort of contextual factor into thinking about these things, because these are not happening in isolation just randomly. There is no track workmen on a track. These are all kind of tracks and workmen and work people in very specific contexts. What if you knew personally one of the people who was tied on one side, but you didn't know any of the other 5 people who were on the other side? The fat man is an opportunity to push over somebody very large who may stop the trolley on the track. The loop in the track sort of like extends the space of the track. So all of these situations sort of force people to think about, is the outcome important, or how you address the problem, is that important? Is letting die the same as saving, the same as killing? So this is a test that's being applied in, as I said, in the development of driverless cars, Google, BMW, Tesla, all of these people. What's my problem with it? There are a couple of problems. The first is that we're talking about a situation where human beings in the near future are going to have to be in vehicles that they share spaces with. That there's, if you read Tesla's ad copy, there's these shared spaces of fluidity and smooth control between humans and machines. And actually, we're already there. Every time you get on a plane, you're already giving over control to a machine. You have, every time people go up in rockets, a lot of the stuff is done by the machine itself. So we already trust machines to do these things. Of course, in the case of planes and rockets, you have highly skilled and trained people, not people like you and me who are possibly not very good drivers. I, of course, am an excellent driver, and I will know how to solve all of these like complex ethical issues. But there's a reason and there's a history to how we trust machines and how we think that machines don't make mistakes, but human beings do. And that's one of the biggest rationales for why we even need self-driving cars, because human beings do make mistakes. They drive inefficiently, and cars will be accurate because they can be, or driverless cars can be accurate because they will be programmed to be so. However, Madeline Elish is a scholar in the United States who's done a lot of work into the history of dealing with error between machines and humans, and finds that in cases of accidents, there is a tendency to blame humans and praise machines. So the machine never really makes a mistake. It's the human that makes a mistake, and this is borne out. The human has to take responsibility. This is not a problem, except that we're not dealing with just a regular car. We're dealing with machines that we think are programmed in a certain way to achieve certain functions. And they're not, there's accountability which has to somehow be stretched between the human and the machine. She talks about this concept of moral crumple zones, like you have a crumple zone in a car accident situation. And she says that the human being tends to get caught in this because we just believe that the machine is all powerful. And the thing that bothers me about it is that somehow we've used this concept of ethics and made it something that the law, in this case in particular, I think the American law can deal with. And I'm not so comfortable with the fact that ethics becomes a question of American tort law, negligence law, the fact that insurance companies have to know how to deal with situations of error and mistake and accidents in self-driving cars. And additionally, that ethics has become a problem of engineering. I'm not sure that we're actually at that point where we can say we have the answers, because if you even look at the trolley problem, I mean, I'm curious why they picked this and not anything else, and that's kind of part of my work now, is to try and get to why this problem and not something else. Was it just something that could be programmed easier and better? And I found this quote, which I really like, which kind of speaks to the law being able to deal with human error and machine error. There's statistics going around that in accidents that Google self-driving car has had, accidents that Google self-driving car has been in, the problem has been the human beings around it and other cars. So the driverless car has been driving around Mountain View, and it's been rear-ended a number of times, but that's because the human beings in other cars have not expected the driverless car to be so accurate. We all know that when we drive, we take risks, we take calculated risks. There are margins of error, and we keep stretching that margin of error depending on the situation and the context, depending on who's in the car with us, if we're alone. But the driverless car is programmed to be really precise. There is a whole lot of gray zone right now and uncertainty about how do you actually regulate and monitor what error means in humans and in machines. And I think there's a cluster of issues around error and how we deal with machine error and human error. I don't think we've worked that out. But there's a point slightly beyond that which interests me as well, which is how does that lead us to a place of accountability? And I think accountability is a much bigger question than actually ethics as it's been framed here. I think that there's been a lot of emphasis on machine learning algorithms and algorithms generally, where many of us in this sort of space are quite familiar with work around algorithms and discussions about algorithms. But I think there's a way in which the discussion of algorithms tends to atomize things and say that, well, that's where the conversation is. The problem is the algorithm and not anything else. And I think that actually if you move outside of just this car, trundling down this, hypothetical road and having to deal with these impossible situations of fat men and, bystanders, if we move outside of that and go beyond and behind the algorithm to understand where do these things come from, then I think we're kind of already in a very different sort of space. We're not talking about cars and trolleys anymore. And therefore, I look to the work of people like Langdon Winner, who asked more than 30 years ago, do artifacts have politics? And he's got a really interesting body of work that looks at how architects who built a lot of the infrastructure around the city of New York, how their values come into the building of architecture and technology. So tunnels that connected New York to its suburbs were built at a certain height to prevent buses from being able to go to kind of more affluent suburbs like Long Island. At that time, when New York was being built, there were only certain kinds of people who traveled by bus. They tended to be poorer and they tended to be black. So there was kind of regulation and values kind of built into the design of an architecture of the city. And I think that a similar kind of thing is happening in the context of self-driving cars, that we have to kind of look behind the algorithms a little bit and look at the networks of humans, of institutions, of motivations, of money, and even signs and symbolism into why are we even going down a certain path. I mean, if we think about the case of Volkswagen, there was a defeat device in Volkswagen, but there were people who actually programmed that defeat device to work in a certain way. And the work of Bruno Latour is also really interesting. And the French philosopher Latour teaches us, I think, to think about power, but in a way that's not just about humans, but recognizes that we are embedded along with so many different artifacts and objects, surfaces, interfaces that have histories and have antecedents, and to ask what is their role and where do they come from. So there's a very interesting chapter in his book, or section in his book, where he talks about a speed bump and a stop sign approaching a school. And he says, the speed bump is actually just an inanimate object that's been built into the road to slow the car down. But the stop sign, when you're approaching a school, says, school ahead, 30 miles per hour. There is nothing else that's actually making your car slow down, but there's a whole bunch of reasons behind why that sign has influence. You could risk the suspension of your car and just go really fast over the speed bump. You could take a moral risk by not paying attention to the sign which says school ahead, slow down. But I mean, those are just two examples. I mean, he brings in all other kinds of objects and says these objects have their histories as well. So I think they're kind of unpacking how are these algorithms developed in these self-driving cars? What are the sort of contexts? Who are these engineers? Who are these companies that are actually taking the concept of ethics and saying, oh, we have the answer. We're going to tell you how to do ethics, and this is how the law is going to regulate it, and this is how machines are going to figure it out for us. And I think I'm going to end by also calling into question the problem of ethics itself. Like, why has ethics become this default? And what kind of ethics? Whose ethics? From the kinds of ethical problems that the trolley problem is about, these come from kind of a Kantian tradition, from consequentialist and virtue ethics that come from a very sort of patriarchal Judeo-Christian framework, and we have ethics that come from many other different places. Feminist scholars have sort of really pointed this out and said that there are perhaps ethics that come from collectives. There are ethics that come from networks and from other sorts of notions. Should we be looking to those? So maybe ethics is the wrong framework. I sort of think about the dog being mourned in Wales, and I fear for the people of Wales because I don't think they're ready for driverless cars or the robot apocalypse, and frankly, neither am I. But I hope to be able to work it out in the next 3 years. And I'm going to end with something that's quite familiar to maybe people who've been to other parts of the world and encountered situations of driving, and it's kind of a funny video, I suppose. And I mean, so this is, for those of you who've been, this is India, but this could be pretty much anywhere in the world. And I think that there's a sort of a very different kind of logic and a very different kind of system. Driverless cars are not meant to sort of function in this environment, I think, but I think this is actually the reality of where the majority world is, and there's a way in which kind of logic and trolleys stop working. And I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where we can actually figure out or understand how this system works. Let's see if we do. I'm waiting to find out. So thank you very much. I'm really happy to open this up to questions.
Thank you very much for this interesting speech. And now we do have around 10 minutes for questions from the audience. So please start. Where's the first question? Ah, there.
Hi, my name is Mark. Very interesting discussion. I think it touches on philosophy on a very deep level. And I'm wondering, at what point is this an issue when most cars are driverless? In which case they can interact with each other and make these certain types of choices based on a network of sorts. If you can comment on that.
I can actually only just speculate. I don't think that I know enough about it. I would like to know more about it, but I think that pretty much what you read is a combination of what journalists in Wired or The Guardian know, and some very sort of technical papers that are coming out. I think this is a field that's being developed as well. People who are in these environments can probably speak to it a lot more, but I think that it is the scale is only going to increase and go up, and it's going to become more and more complex. So yeah, no, I'm not gonna. I can't answer that sort of, technically, but it terrifies me to think of how we don't know how to sort this out.
Okay, thank you.
Some more questions, please.
But I don't know, there are a lot of people here who are also part of the mobility track and kind of possibly work in some of these industries. So if you actually have an answer to the gentleman or something more technical to contribute, please do.
Hi, my name is Caroline. Thank you for the interesting lecture. Maybe just a brief follow-up. What I understood where you were hinting at is if all cars are without drivers, then there's no danger because there's no humans in the cars. But then there are still pedestrians, or at least, there will be people outside, so I don't see how it would actually change. Maybe you can explain a bit more why you were asking your question?
Yeah, so I was more interested in when does this cease to be a problem on a highway, for example, where maybe there are no pedestrians. In the very particular case that we saw in the video, where a car had to make a choice between running into an SUV or motorcyclers. In which case, it's, let's say 50 years in the future, when they're all automated, they're all driverless cars with people in them. In this case, can't all the cars to the left, to the right, and behind this truck make a decision together, in which case this ethics issue ceases to be an issue?
Thanks for that, Caroline, for that clarification. First, I don't know if 50 years in the future everything is going to be automated, there will be no humans, and that we should do things now based on that assumption. The other is that I think a lot of these systems, not at the consumer level, but at possibly at a military level, a lot of these things already do talk to each other in a way and share information where you sometimes don't have a human in the loop, as they say, in sort of the development of cars. It's possible that at some point you will have some things where there's no human in the loop, but I think that there's always going to be human in the loop, at least not always. I think there's going to be human in the loop design a fair bit because people are recognizing that this is an issue. You cannot completely take humans out. So, for example, Tesla definitely has this in their design of human in the loop, whereas Google recently had some issues with the California law because they've designed their cars to be completely driverless. And the California law a couple of months ago, maybe late last year, was that you cannot have a completely driverless car. There has to be a human in the machine that can override it or, in some way. So I don't know if we're there yet. And yes, and I'm uncertain about whether we can actually make that decision for people who will be around 50 years in the future and say that, I hope that clarifies.
Your comment was a great segue to my question, actually, which is, I'm Jennifer Schulte.
Ah,
hello.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. My question was, to what extent can humans override the decision-making of the machine? Do we have that feature now or not? You mentioned certain designs, Tesla versus Google, have the human in the loop.
Yep.
But when and how can a human override machine decision-making?
I think that there are some instances where they can. Unfortunately, I don't know the detail, and I would love to. If anyone from Tesla is here and wants me to, wants to give me some time in your lab or to talk to scientists, I'd be really happy to. I don't know, but there may be people in the room who know more specifically where and how and in what instances. I'm trying to glean as much as I can from the research papers, but I'm not an engineer. So.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm wondering, so this question about the trolley problem seems to be really the most popular question to ask whenever you talk about self-driving cars. And I was wondering, you were slightly hinting at that, what do you think, or maybe you have some ideas about this, what other questions could we discuss about upcoming developments? What are maybe questions we should discuss instead? Do you have some suggestions just to freshen things up?
Thank you. Well, actually, I mean, I think towards the end, the stuff I talked about in terms of accountability, but more, what are the sort of contexts and environments in which this stuff is being developed? It could be self-driving car today, it's something else tomorrow. I mean, there's all kinds of, I'm sure very useful, but also utterly ludicrous technology that's being developed. And I'm personally, I think, more interested in questions around where is this coming from? Who's making the decisions? Where is the money coming from and where is it going? I think there's an entire culture in Silicon Valley is, I mean, quite easy to pinpoint as one place. But I think there's so many streams of power and influence which are invisible to us right now, and wealth, which are invisible. And for me, I think that's kind of the interesting question. The problem with the trolley thing is that it really narrows it all down to a car driving on a road in a certain way, and whether it will have an accident or not. I think that, yeah, I would find also the sort of development of cars towards safer, more efficient driving, electric cars. I mean, I know that there's a lot of twinning of those things as well. So I think that maybe that's more useful technology. I mean, just like dependence on oil generally is problematic. It's not a car problem specifically. Maybe getting human beings out of cars or a reliance on cars is sort of like more important issues. But yeah, but personally, I'm more interested in where do the algorithms come from and who makes the decisions.
That was actually my question. Did you get to talk to developers? Like, how does it work? What's their background? Do they have philosophers on their team, or how are these decisions made?
I want to do some ethnography with high-end tech production cultures. I think that's definitely where I want to go. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions there. So after I do that, and maybe in like 2 years' time, Republica, I'll come back and talk about it then, but I don't know at this point.
I get the question myself, and don't you think there are more severe issues that, I mean, like, if you take, for example, drones in war conflicts, for me it's a much more severe issue concerning ethical aspects of it. I mean, I share the Mark's point of view that I don't see much problem with self-driving cars. Like, I mean, come on, how often do you see this trolley problem on the roads, on the highways? I don't know. But for me, this is really scary when we make war not with humans, but with emotionless drones, and they just fly to this village and they kill just everyone. For me, this is like insanity. Don't you think we should concentrate more on these kind of problems? Yeah, no, I agree. I think that that's very problematic, and there is sort of a continuum between the drones in the sky, and I think there's another panel going on, or it's just happened around this exactly, and I was talking to some friends who are on that panel, and one of the things we talked about, and which I think I forgot to mention in my talk, was that it's not just a question of the law or engineering being able to figure this out, but what does licensing or accreditation look like? And I think that's another sort of interesting question, that there is a kind of inevitability to increasing shared spaces of human-machine interaction and different levels of autonomy, but we perhaps have to think about not just regulation in terms of how insurance payouts will happen, but what does it mean to actually engage in that space and to accredit and license and use things like drones, to use things like driverless cars. I mean, there can be a lot of benefits of these things in fleets or in people with reduced mobility. I mean, there's a lot of people who have great rationales for driverless cars, but there's too much of a focus on these sorts of problems, which actually, I think, do happen. When we drive cars, we constantly have to make these split-second decisions. So I think that
I think that there is something still more to be said about kind of working through these problems. I don't think that, and I think the same is for things like drones as well. I don't think that they're that separate, actually. And there's a lot of sharing of technology. Jennifer, of course.
They're actually quite connected. I don't know, maybe some people in this room have heard a recent report this week that some news around how a violent extremist group is actually figuring out driverless car technology to use a driverless car as a weapon.
Well,
ISIS.
Yeah, no, I saw the link that you sent me. And I mean, but there's also sort of like a tipping point. A terrorist is a terrorist and will use, pretty much anything that they want to be violent. So you can't also vilify, driverless cars. I mean, like a terrorist will pick up anything. So I don't know, I can't respond to that, actually. But I think the question of drones, driverless cars, autonomy is the bigger issue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience too. And now we have a small break, and then we continue at 4:15 with 3 speakers from HRS Innovation Hub. And I hope to see you again.